The chair now recognizes Senator the Honourable Fred Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam President. One of the things I liked about the structure of this debate is that those from the government side spoke, and we knew what the government's position is on various things, and then we have a chance to respond. And that's always how I thought it should be structured, because at the end of the day, the mover of the motion gets to wind up the debate in any event. But the whole idea, I think, for the elucidation of the public is for the government to put its position and the opposition be in a position to respond to it. I need to do one kind of cleaning up thing. When I spoke the last time, I was going to wait since the leader of government business fancies himself as a man of literature. When I spoke in my words of condolences for the late Teresa Moxie Ingram, I ascribed the authorship of the line, "Death be not proud," to an American author. And something bothered me about that the whole time I was thinking about it. And I went and I actually checked, and I was horrified because it's actually John Donne. It's a sonnet by John Donne. And I got myself mixed up with a poet, a Jamaican poet, who later became an American, Claude McKay, whose poem actually begins, "If we must die, let it not be like dogs and hogs." But anyway, I got mixed up. So I just want to correct that for the record, that the actual author of the poem, "Death Be Not Proud," is actually John Donne, who I believe is a Scotsman, to make that point. The Minister for Grand Bahama, and basically for this purpose I'll just be going through a checklist of the things that I heard, but the Minister for Grand Bahama was very expert and adept. He almost had me convinced by his line of attack, which was to use a lot of statistics from the IMF and from the central bank. And I was reminded immediately of that line, which is properly ascribed to Mark Twain, that says, "There are lies, damn lies, and statistics." And I say that because the more serious point is this, that it amazed me that the IMF could actually say the economy has turned the corner, when all the measures that we know of, the debt, the deficit, the unemployment figures, have gone in the upward direction, but they say that the economy has turned the corner. Wonders never cease, but you know, it's the IMF. And you can concentrate, and I warn every government, because every government in the Caribbean is a victim of this, be careful how you concentrate on the macro picture and not what is actually happening on the ground. Because as all you erudite gentlemen and ladies were speaking today, text messages were coming to me, "Mr. Mitchell, do you know any place where I can find a job?" So your statistics might say lots of things, but the fact is there are people, the reality on the ground is people are still hunting for work. Right? And what has amazed me about this period is the number of people who actually complain that they don't have money to buy food to eat. That astounds me. So you got to be very careful how you tout this macro picture, because it's what's actually taking place in people's homes. I remember in 2008, and I used the book of Genesis when the whole bottom fell out of the economy worldwide. And I used the book of Genesis, you know, the dream of 7 years of plenty that Joseph interpreted, the 7 years of plenty and the 7 lean years. And I said this would be over in 7 years. But it isn't. And in those days, people in homes worth $250,000, $350,000. If you went in, their cupboards were bare. No food to eat. That's the actuality on the ground. So I was glad when you brought your package, because I got my package too. I brought my corned beef. I brought my corned beef. I mean, please, Dr. Sand, don't attack my corned beef. You know, my leader yesterday told me that he had just sat down to breakfast at Fire Engine, only to read that Dr. Dwayne Sands wants to take corned beef off the protected list. Now, the serious point is this. What I remember about this meal, I haven't eaten corned beef in a long time, but, you know, doctors say no red meat, okay, so that's me. And that gives you an example of how you get to persuade people to change their diet. The doctor tells you don't do so and so. And that's what I meant in the statement about economic coercion. What it shows is that taxes do not change people's habits. Yeah. They don't. And so you have to find another mechanism to get people to shift their dietary practices. But right now, this costs me $1.99. And I'll tell you this. When I was a kid, my parents, we did two things there were two meals that we ate on a Saturday evening. One was either pig feet souse or corned beef. And my mother used to have this. This used to be put in the refrigerator. It was cold. She took it out. She sliced it in thin slices, put it in slices on a bed of lettuce with some lemon and some onions, and we ate that with white rice. No, I'm talking about corned beef. I know the difference between corned beef and Spam. That's what we ate on a Saturday evening. And I think about all that stuff in retrospect now because it was obviously an economic decision. It was a cheap meal to do on a Saturday evening. And I'm saying that we have to be careful how we get, and all governments are victims to this. You can't have your head in the clouds about the actual practicalities of what people have to face. I saw where they said the Prices Commission and the minister actually gets up and says, we must have stir-fried salmon instead of corned beef and rice. You know how much stir-fried salmon costs? I checked it. A meal in Mr. Diagula's shop costs $14.99 for salmon. Fire Engine costs $2.50. All right, it's not his shop. I withdraw it. It's not his shop. But you got my point. The serious point is, if you are going to adjust the prices, the price control items in a bread basket, you have to be very careful how you proceed with that. And use other means. And of course, the sector, the fast food sector, has already responded in the newspaper this morning about the whole idea of putting taxation on them. I was going to ask the Attorney General, how are you going to do that without discriminating against other businesses? How are you going to define what is fast food? Because people now go to Bamboo Shack, to Sammy's, to Kentucky Fried Chicken, to Burger King, to McDonald's. So you're going to put taxes on all of them, but Atlantis gets no tax on their buffet. And a buffet, what is in the marketplace, what is it, $75 a meal? So if you're talking about rich people, they can stand the tax, but the poor people on the $2.50 Fire Engine, which they get from the restaurant of choice, which they go to get their breakfast before they go to school, can't stand the tax. So I just put that word of caution. Be very careful about making these macro arguments without thinking about what the micro situation is in people's homes. I had a question to ask about the Oban agreement, and I think the arguments were covered fairly thoroughly by our side. But perhaps in his winding up, the Attorney General might say whether he believes that the agreement, the heads of agreement, is in fact an enforceable agreement. Is this an agreement which is enforceable in law. Because if it is enforceable in law, and I looked at some of the dictionary as opposed to legal definitions of what a heads of agreement is. If it is, some people say heads of agreement are just general heads and that you agree and you then have a contractual agreement. But if this heads of agreement is an agreement which is enforceable, I would like to know how the government proposes, without damages, to be able to get out of a contract an agreement which says that no matter what the EIA is, you cannot get out of the agreement. You cannot cancel the agreement on the basis of a negative environmental impact assessment. Is that what it says? I misread it? Well, again, I'd love to know what the answer is in fact to that. Because my reading of it is that the government cannot cancel the agreement on the basis of a negative environmental impact assessment study. Now, the other point I would like to make is that when we come to the vote with regard to this resolution, you will forgive us if we can't see our way clear to support this. Had this been a resolution which dealt with the actual country's finances, that is, the government makes the case that we are borrowing some money for some specific purposes, the principle of the Progressive Liberal Party is that we do not oppose the government in that kind of resolution. But not a resolution which is in fact getting the opposition to agree that the Minister of Finance has done a great job. Because from our point of view, and I would say the objective facts, that doesn't seem to be the case to us at all. And I was telling my colleagues when I read the mid-year budget statement that I was reminded of the Mother Goose rhyme that says this: Little Jack Horner sat in the corner eating a Christmas pie. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I."
I remember when I was there all about
Self-praise. 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 Self-praise is no praise. Self-praise is no praise. Self-praise is no praise. As a matter of fact, Corinthians tells you that charity is not puffed up. It vaunteth not itself. So let others tell you that you've done well. But don't pat yourself on the back. Don't pat yourself on the back. And some of the issues we have is this. From a philosophical point of view, what some of us don't understand is this. What is the issue about borrowing and debt and deficits and so on and so on? Intrinsically, what is the issue? Because the country has the ability to repay. One, the country has the ability to repay. And the country has the ability to grow itself out of any difficulties that it has. The country can't develop without borrowing. Nothing will happen. It'll come to a full stop. The country was being managed in a way, its finances were being managed in a way that the cash flow of the country was being carefully shepherded by the people, the same officials you have, but for one, in the Ministry of Finance. Every day. Paul Adley, James Smith, Barry Christie, Michael Halkitis. I dare say Carlton Francis. Here's the drill. You walk into work, it's the Minister of Finance, the public officials come to you and say, "Minister, this is what is in the bank, this is what we got to pay today." It is inconceivable for a minister of health under a progressive Liberal Party administration to walk into a cabinet and say, I can't buy HIV medication for the hospital, and the response is you got to wait till the second tranche is released. That couldn't happen with us. And I'm happy to see, I'm fine, you all found the money. But you know, what we keep telling public officials is, your role, you know, last year you were opposition. Great to describe problems. But your role is not to describe problems now. Yeah, it's to fix them. To fix them. All right. Not to tell me that you ran out of medication. You know. You know, and this is one of the arguments I have with our mutual friend, the Honourable Minister for Education. You know, you're not a talk show host anymore. No. You're not. You're the Minister for Education. You got to put the curriculum in the schools and make sure it has all the tools to educate the kids. That's what you do. And don't go around saying, yeah, people are going to say it's victimization, but I don't care. How could you say that? Everything we know about him is antithetical to that kind of value. One is an English Catholic and one is a Roman Catholic, but the values are the same. The little words changed here or there in the Mass, but you know, yeah, one holy and Catholic and I. But my point is the larger point. Fix the problems. And I come to education because of this. When I read this BEPS process that we are now undergoing, it suddenly occurred to me in a new way that the problems which we face in the Bahamas as a small country are getting ever more complex. It requires more and more intellectual talent. I don't understand why the Caribbean as a whole does not see that it is better for us to act in concert, but each of us are busy struggling by themselves. 100,000 down in St. Vincent, 150,000 in St. Lucia. Barbados got 250,000. Jamaica has 2 million. You know, Cuba has 7. But all of us are individually struggling. And in the process, the EU is winning the game. It is almost as if we're being recolonized. I said, just to finish this point about the sophistication which this requires. There's an American diplomat here, and he came to see me as foreign minister one day. Something they were complaining about. There's always an endless list of what we don't do and what we don't do and so on and so on. And I just gave this sigh of relief when he, you know, exasperation when he came and said, "Okay, what is it today?" So he said, "Well, Minister, you are the ones who said you wanted to be independent. So if you want to be independent, you got to be able to pay for it and do what's necessary to be independent." And I said, "Okay, touche." So no more complaints from me. But what I do know is that in the morality of the general construct of the way the world goes now, where these people are imposing what I call unfunded mandates on us, because we're going happily along in a relatively regulation-free society. That's the joy of living in these places. I say to people all the time, I cannot live in the United States of America. Too many rules. Drives you crazy. You can't do this, you can't do that, so on and so forth. So that's the joy of living in this place. But now all these things are being imposed upon us, no way to pay for it. And guess what? Perhaps this is a lot of circumlocution, but if you bear with me, this point. The Caribbean Prime Minister has complained to Joe Biden, Vice President, said, "Look, the Americans are stealing all our talent." And he said, "Yeah, that's true. The United States wants the smartest people in the world. We can afford it, so anyone you can produce, we can take it. Sorry about that." And that's what's happening. So at the same time that all these sophisticated mandates are being imposed upon the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, our talent is leaving us, and it's talent that goes to other countries because they can be offered a higher price. And guess what? It is our tax dollars that are paying for the education so these people can give their talents to other societies. And there's got to be something, no one makes the moral case against these people for that. And the problem is, because the post-colonial era is so far away, the present leaders of these countries, the United States, you see the post-world order is now falling apart, or falling apart, and the EU, they don't remember, the great struggles which the liberals in their societies had for countries like ours to be free and independent. All they see is a set of crooks in the Caribbean who are trying to steal their tax dollars, and they're making a case that we must collect their tax money for them. At the same time, what they're doing is denuding us of all the talent which we have, because they have the money to do so. And we're using the tax dollars, which they're now denying us because of these mandates, for us to train the kids for them to go to their societies. There's something pernicious, immoral, unethical about it. And I wish we could really make a public stand as a region against this. And that's why my love affair has always been, as a matter of public policy, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the work it does. Because it's not the work of the Minister for Financial Services or the Deputy Prime Minister or the Minister or the Prime Minister to be watching whether some words in some letter are exactly the opposite it's supposed to be. That's what the Foreign Service does. And we, when we're in office, tried to build up a Foreign Service to do precisely that. And I'm really aggrieved at the fact that, first of all, it appears that the Foreign Service has been gutted and not relied upon properly to do its job. It seemed as if there was this thing about, we're going to save money by bringing this one home and bringing the next one home, and it ended up that everyone who's brought home has been replaced. Well, you tell me the exceptions. You tell me the exceptions. No, I mean, I understand, and I understand that, but there's sinecures too. Everybody has to have a sinecure. That's the way the system works, eh? And you don't come and pretend that there's some moral high ground on this. But what I'm saying is, do not give the impression, because even today, people call up and say, I'm stuck in some country overseas. Someone from the Philippines calling me today, as a matter of fact, better example. And I remember this like yesterday. 2 days after I lost the election in 2007, no longer foreign minister, some parent calls me frantically, her daughter is about to be deported out of Grenada. And they couldn't get anyone to help. So I called someone who called someone, and they actually got the lady off the plane in Grenada. Took her off the plane. One phone call. And she came to me today. She said, you never met me. I didn't know you. You did this. I wanted to thank you for doing that. That's the Foreign Service. That's the Foreign Service. And I'm saying we have to ensure, that we have a Foreign Service, because that's the service which is going to lift us above our weight. And these young people, all of them are anxious to serve overseas. The money which they get paid is not very good. So everybody joins the Foreign Service to serve overseas. And I don't want, and I say this advisedly, I don't want anyone at a political level going cherry picking and say, this one was close to Mitchell, the next one was close to Mitchell, so they can't serve overseas, and stopping the growth of these people's careers because this one is identified as connected with me or the PLP and so on and so forth. None of that came before me. I remember, two people in particular. They both still work for the Foreign Service. Yeah, and I mean, people in my party were hysterical about this individual. When are you going to do this? And I said, one of your public officials called me up and said, look, X, Y, and Z. I said, fine. We're going to ensure that that doesn't happen. And that's what you do. Because that's not supposed to be the way it works. Not supposed to be the way it works. One fellow, he even had the temerity to go campaigning with the torchbearers in North Eleuthera with his red shirt on, a Foreign Service officer. I said to the Director General, I said, what's this? What's this? I mean, you know, I don't know about that. I'm talking about this particular incident. I'm talking about my conduct as a minister in response to that. I don't know about what you're talking about. You know, I didn't talk about that. I'm talking about what your response is to it. And they said to me, they protected him. They said, oh, well, Minister, you know, he didn't have the torch on his shirt. It was only red, you know. So I say, okay, I rest that case. But what I'm saying is that I do not want any discrimination against these people. And the thing is, the minister comes from a particular background. He's a religious individual, right? So I expect him, and I expect him to conduct that department in a way which appreciates that everybody has their choices. And that does not come before any politician. They do their jobs, and they're entitled to serve overseas, and they should go overseas. And for me, it was simply this. Bring me the list. In order of seniority, who goes, goes, and then, and the other thing is the opportunity to travel with the minister. That too is a big deal for these Foreign Service officers, to travel with the Prime Minister, to travel with the minister. And the reason I did it, you know, all this complaints about delegation, because we have a short window to get these young people up to speed on what they face in the international community. And there is no other way to do it than to do it. There's no other way to do it than to do it. So that's my bit on what we ought to be doing. Ought to be doing. I'm also concerned that there is still this public misunderstanding about BAMSI and what its role is and why the former Prime Minister led the way in trying to establish this operation. Free National Movement did an expert bit of propaganda, because if you look or take their word for it, you would think that the only thing that happened at BAMSI in North Andros was a building burned down. That was it. The whole thing was a building burned down. But that's not BAMSI. That's not BAMSI. That's such a small part of what, I took the Chinese ambassador there, went and saw the facility, heard the aims and objectives of those who run the facility, and heard what they wanted to do. The thing is, Mr. Christie was a Minister of Agriculture. And you know, from Pinling's time to Midge Hanna's time to Roker's time, all of them were always talking about food security and how we're going to feed ourselves. But the fact is, when I came home, and my first job was as a radio producer / extension officer with the Bahamas Information Services, and I used to do the radio program for agriculture. That's how I first got to see the Bahamas. And in those days, pork production, the Bahamas was self-sufficient in pork. That was 1974. The Bahamas was self-sufficient in eggs, 1974. And all of those things have gone into reverse. So the question is, how do we reverse it? And so Christie says, gentlemen, we're going to spend this money trying to reverse this. First, it's going to be a school. Then it's going to help improve the stock around the country. For example, when I grew up as a kid, people used to talk about Long Island sheep runners, but hardly any sheep in Long Island today. The stock is run down. Goats as well. As a matter of fact, except Ragged Island. I mean, one of the funny stories about my visit to Ragged Island was that we thought we were going to have these public policy problems to talk about. And the meeting, I won't say, descended into a row between who's responsible for the goats being loose in Ragged Island. It was the most extraordinary meeting I sat through. Well, no, this is before the hurricane, because there must have been about 400 or 500 goats in Ragged Island. And people were saying you couldn't leave your door open because the goats would go in and eat all your food and so on and so forth. And so there was this fuss between two citizens about who was responsible for the goats being set loose in Ragged Island. But that was the exception. Everywhere, the stock has fallen off. And so BAMSI was designed to improve, to breed new stock and to provide stock for farmers across the country who wanted to improve their stock. That's one. They said, other thing they said is, they did some research across the sector, because what you want to have is ties between the agricultural sector and the tourism sector. And they said, when people in the Bahamas eat fish, what do they eat it with? So we all put our hands up and said, limes. Throughout the country, the lime groves, the citrus groves are decimated. So BAMSI was designed to get that up and going again, to improve the stock, so that if farmers wanted to start groves in North Eleuthera, or because North Eleuthera, when I came home in '74, was the second highest producing citrus area in the country after Abaco. Right. So, right. That's what they said. They also said they also looked at they canvassed the tourism sector, and they said to tourists, when you come to a paradise, what do you expect to see? And the tourists answered, coconut trees. If you're coming to paradise, they want to see coconut trees. So BAMSI, if you go to BAMSI, you'll see rows and rows of coconut trees, again, for people to improve the stock, to grow the coconuts. And now you see that the practice has reached what used to happen in the Caribbean, or what still happens in the Caribbean. If you went around the savannah in Trinidad, you know, or in the streets in Jamaica, you can get fresh coconut water and jelly. And now I see the practice has actually popped up here in the Bahamas. So that's the reason for BAMSI. So I watched, and I'm watching very carefully, this so-called redesign, reconstruction, whatever, of BAMSI. And I think I read where they said that they do not want BAMSI to be competing commercially with the private sector. I think. But I caution this by saying this. I use this word of caution. Part of the training exercise for the students at BAMSI is also in marketing and sales. And that's the reason why you have this marketing and sales component, so the people who are there get to learn the process of how you market something and how you sell it. So it's not a commercial producer in the sense of another big farm like B.G. Harmon. This is meant to be a training operation for students. So I would caution that. So I come back now to the question of, the final point I would make is the question of this debt managing and the cash flow I was talking about. Recently, the IDB put into the public domain some advice to the government, saying, look, you're in a hurricane zone, and in next year's budget, you better put in some provisions or expect to have to make some short-term borrowing, because it is the only way you're going to be able to protect the country and get it back up and going from from hurricane damage. And I say that because when the last hurricane took place, and I remember it because it came the day after my birthday, the morning of the 6th of October at 4 o'clock, the hurricane came. This country was shut down from the 4th of October till the 9th. $100 million of revenue could not be collected during those days. And the only way we could get the country back up and going was to borrow $150 million. And no matter how you spin the story, leaders of the Free National Movement and the government, if you look at the math, the only difference between your deficit projections and ours is the hurricane. That's it. And you said it. Never mind what the minister said in the propaganda bits of his statement. when you actually look at the technical bits and you do the math, the difference is the hurricane.
That's it.
And I warn you, they're telling us hurricanes are coming again. And if you have a major hurricane, what are you going to do? And that's why we were so concerned. This business of, you know, my friend Norma knows. My mother used to do this. Mr. Gibson, Mr. Dames around the corner used to keep a little book. And we used to go to the shop, and every time we wanted something, Mr. Dames, Mr. Gibson wrote it down in the book. Right. On Friday, when the old lady gets paid, she sends us around the corner to pay Mr. Gibson and Mr. Dames. Except sometimes it was a little short. But Mr. Dames knew that the old lady, the old man, if we owed 10 pounds, would give him 7, say, I'll give you 3 on Monday, and I'll make it up. Everybody knows that's how the government does as well. You manage your cash flow. So you don't go and pay Kalina $60 million. Kalina can wait. They're a big player. But you put the medicine in the hospital and you buy the ventilator because you got to do it. Those are the choices you have to make daily, daily. A minister of finance, just like you managing your household every month, is watching the balances in the bank. And that's what we were saying. If you manage the cash flow, you don't have to go into the arms of the IMF. Because in our view, it's not possible to pay off every single debt you have. You can't do it. You'll break yourself. Let's say the mantra you have now that you're going to pay off all the bills. Do you know how much money the Bahamas government owes for publicly acquired land now? Do you know? Last count was 500 million. 500 million. So you can borrow 500 million to pay all of that off too? Clearly, you negotiate the amounts. So that's our only advice on this. And I mean, you know, you're the government. You manage the affairs of the country. You manage the affairs of the country. And we managed them the best way we could and kept the country going. Kept it going to such an extent that we were able to hand it off to you, and you were able to borrow $750 million without blinking an eye.
Case is that bad you couldn't get it.
And you boasted about how, no problem. You know, we went around the world, happy to lend us the money. But I say, be careful of that too. Because, you know, bankers will get you in trouble. They never lose. They always collect the interest. And so every time you come, it's only a question of how much it's going to cost. And they believe sovereign debt is cool. Never mind all this thing about C grade and so on and so forth. All that does is affect the price of what they're going to lend the money on. So we're not in a position to support this resolution. You're not surprised. And I think the debate has elucidated a lot of policy points. I say that those who are boasting about the tourism figures, you know, thank God for Bahamas. The fake, phony hotel that was being set up by the crooks that we couldn't do business with and so on and so forth. But now it's all right to cut ribbons, and the greatest thing since sliced bread. But as the leader of government says, that's governance. That's politics. I listened carefully to the changes announced on immigration. I'm a little wary when you start borrowing things from Australia. A little wary. Wary, W-A-R-Y. I don't want us to end up putting migrants in a camp in Papua New Guinea. But that's not possible. Okay, all right. Yes, that's a stretch. To Papua New Guinea? Do they pay well down there? We had a Bahamian who was working there, Elizabeth Smith, with the Commonwealth. Did a good job. But I want to see the details of this. The decision I was talking about today is, and obviously your people are looking at this, you know, but I want you all to win one case. I used to say this when I sat around the table. Please, man, win one case. Just win a case. Win one case, man. You know?
We could win with the case.
I mean, win one case. Win one case, man. You know? Just win one case. You know? So, no, in the wind-up, you'll tell me all the things that I said wrong, no doubt. But, you know, I'm not very well behaved. So, yes. And please take my concern about this education system, the education ministers, and the investments we have to make in education quite seriously, you know. I had a long talk with a family in Salt Pond. 3 kids. First one, 4.0. Second one, 4.0. Both go to Canada, don't return home. Son is 3.96. They're worried now, what is he going to do? And they've invested all their money in their business, and they said, you know, what are we going to do? A friend of ours in Grand Bahama right now is desperately afraid that his child, if she doesn't get something to do, will move to Canada. And another young man who was training as a CPA the other day, speaking to him, he's married now, living in Tampa. And this is what is happening. Our school system, training our kids, using our tax dollars, these people imposing these things, taking away our tax dollars, and the kids are going to the developed societies to run those societies. So we believe that we can, if we grow this economy, just as we told the EU in our days. You know, I sat there before this EU commissioner. He was in a blue seersucker suit. Could you believe that? This was like watching a 1950s movie. The man sat there with a ceiling fan going, squeaking like in a Humphrey Bogart movie, and a fan. He's sitting in this chair, and he's telling me why the Bahamas can't get aid from the EU because we don't do what they ask them to do, what they ask us to do. And our government took the decision, we can do it out of the consolidated fund, to heck with your aid. And I hope that in things coming, at some point, we can stand up to these people and just do things for ourselves. And the only way to do that is if we grow our economy. But growing our economy can't be done if one hand is clapping and you always saying, it's the PLP, it's the PLP. All of us have to join to build this place, and we all want to build this place. And I wish that mantra would stop. So with those words, I say to our supporters out there, get ready. Get ready. It's 49 months left. The countdown is on. We are the faithful few who will fight bravely to save the nation's life. Thank you, Madam President.
Yes.